When the power went out that evening, plunging the research lab into sudden darkness, every instinct in me screamed to run. But I couldn't move. His eyes held me captive, their intensity illuminated only by the faint glow of the emergency exit sign. It was late, much later than usual, and we were entirely alone. Alone, that is, except for the suffocating weight of everything we'd been carefully ignoring. My name is Zoe, and I'm a lab technician in one of London's leading biotech research labs. The sterile halls and glass partitions usually buzzed with the hum of sophisticated equipment and quiet conversations about data analyses and test results. Tonight, though, the silence was thick, electric, charged in a way I'd never experienced before. Across from me stood Dr. Aidan Clark, my supervisor, a brilliant scientist, intimidatingly sharp and frustratingly attractive. He had the kind of charisma that pulled everyone in effortlessly, though he always maintained a carefully professional distance. Until tonight. We'd spent weeks working, side by side on a critical research breakthrough. Hours turned into late nights, shared jokes turned into subtle glances, and somewhere along the way, we'd crossed a line without ever acknowledging it. Now, with no one around to distract us, there was nowhere left to hide from the tension that had become unbearable. Earlier that evening, Rachel, my closest friend at the lab, had joked as she left, "Don't stay too late or people will start to talk," with a teasing wink. I'd laughed it off, but her words echoed in my mind as the lights flickered and darkness claimed the lab. People were already talking, harmless gossip about lingering glances and whispered conversations behind closed doors, harmless until it wasn't. Dr. Clark cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "I'll check the breaker. Stay here." His voice was calm, authoritative, but beneath it was something else. Uncertainty, maybe even vulnerability. As his footsteps faded down the hall, I released a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, letting my thoughts spiral. Why had I stayed tonight? Why hadn't I left when I had the chance? Deep down, I knew the answer was standing in the next room, fiddling with circuits in the dark. I followed the faint sound of his movements, moving carefully through the shadows. "Dr. Clark?" I called softly, my voice barely louder than a whisper. He didn't answer right away, but I could feel him nearby, closer than I expected. "Zoe," he finally said, his voice low, almost strained. I think the fuse blew completely. I stopped abruptly as my hand brushed against his sleeve, startled at how close we'd become in the darkness. His sharp intake of breath sent a shiver down my spine, and for a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. Every second of silence seemed to stretch into eternity, loaded with an unspoken tension we'd both been avoiding. Maybe we should leave this for tomorrow," I whispered, hating the uncertainty in my voice. I could barely see him, but I could sense every nuance of his presence. The slight tremble in his hand, the scent of his cologne mixed with antiseptic from the lab, the warmth radiating from him, even through the cool air. He leaned closer, his voice low, controlled, but trembling with something I couldn't quite identify. "Do you really want to leave?" My mind screamed yes, but my body had already betrayed me. I didn't move away. I couldn't. Instead, I lifted my gaze, barely able to make out the contours of his face, and whispered back, I don't know." Then, from somewhere deeper in the lab, a noise shattered the silence, a distant clang, metallic and echoing. Both our heads snapped toward the sound. My heart thundered in panic. Had someone else stayed late without us noticing? Had someone seen us in this compromised moment? As fear surged through me, Dr. Clark stepped protectively closer, his hand gently brushing against my waist, pulling me slightly behind him. In any other moment, this would have felt deeply inappropriate, forbidden even. Now, it just felt necessary, urgent, electric. But before either of us could speak or move, a shadow darted across the hallway, too fast to identify clearly but unmistakably human. My breath caught sharply in my throat. Someone else had definitely been here all along, watching silently from the shadows. You won't believe what happened next. Subscribe for more workplace secrets. Dr. Clark tightened his grip on my waist, guiding me quietly back toward the shelter of the lab equipment room. My heart pounded relentlessly in my chest, every nerve ending acutely aware of his touch. Behind the door, hidden in near-total darkness, we stood impossibly close. Close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his chest, hear the subtle, uneven rhythm of his breathing. Neither of us dared speak, afraid the smallest whisper would betray our position. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, slow and deliberate. Someone was moving methodically through the lab, as if searching for something, or someone. The suspense was excruciating. Who else could possibly be here at this hour? Rachel had left long ago, and security rarely ventured this deep into the research wing after midnight. Dr. Clark leaned in, his voice barely audible, his lips dangerously close to my ear. "Did you see anyone else before the lights went out?" "No," I whispered, my voice shaking slightly. "Just us." His fingers brushed gently against my hip, steadying me, but sending my pulse into a frenzy. The air grew heavy with unspoken questions. How far was too far? Were we really hiding just because someone had entered the lab? Or were we hiding from something else entirely? Something far more dangerous. Something forbidden we'd both been quietly craving. The footsteps moved closer, paused, then gradually faded into silence. Neither of us dared to breathe. When the quiet stretched on, Dr. Clark slowly relaxed, though he didn't pull away. Instead, his thumb traced softly, almost absent-mindedly, along the curve of my waist, igniting sparks beneath my skin. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled slightly, betraying his own carefully maintained composure. "We should check who it was, just to be safe." Reluctantly, I nodded, stepping out from the protective closeness of his embrace. Instantly, the cold air replaced his warmth, snapping me back to reality. We emerged cautiously from our hiding spot, finding the lab hallway empty, bathed in eerie silence. The tension eased slightly, but only slightly. "Maybe it was security," I offered weakly, knowing it sounded unconvincing even as I said it. He shook his head, his eyes still wary. "Security would have called out, asked who was here. Whoever that was, they didn't want to be discovered either." We moved slowly through the halls, checking labs and offices. Everything appeared untouched until we reached Dr. Clark's private office. His door was slightly ajar, a detail he noticed immediately, his shoulders visibly stiffening. "Stay behind." "Me," he instructed quietly. My pulse quickened again as I followed him into the darkened office. Immediately, I noticed something strange. A faint scent lingering in the air, sweet perfume mixed with cologne. A chill spread through me. Someone had definitely been here. He flipped on a small desk lamp, illuminating his normally pristine workspace. Everything seemed normal at first glance, but I quickly noticed the subtle disturbance. A scattering of papers on his desk, a pen knocked carelessly to the floor, and, most concerning of all, the distinct print of lipstick on an abandoned coffee cup. Dr. Clark stared at the cup, his brow furrowed deeply. A strange emotion flickered across his face, something like recognition, disappointment, or perhaps even betrayal. Instantly, jealousy sparked inside me. Who had been here with him before me, and why had he hidden it? Before I could process my feelings, a quiet knock sounded behind us. We turned sharply, hearts hammering. It was Rachel, standing in the doorway, a faint smirk on her lips. "Rachel?" My voice wavered with disbelief and relief. "What are you doing here?" Her eyes moved swiftly between me and Dr. Clark, lingering suspiciously. "Forgot my keys. Didn't expect anyone else to still be around," she said slowly, her tone casual but laden with hidden meaning. Her gaze rested pointedly on the lipstick-stained cup. "Looks like I missed the party, though." A flush burned my cheeks as I avoided her eyes. Did she suspect something? Was she the one who had walked through the lab? Or had she only just arrived? More importantly, whose lipstick marked that cup? My mind raced through possibilities, jealousy mingling with uncertainty. Dr. Clark regained his composure quickly, stepping forward assertively. "Rachel, next time, let security escort you. You startled us." She smirked again, eyes narrowed slightly. "Of course, Dr. Clark. Wouldn't want to interrupt anything important." Her gaze shifted pointedly to me, a challenge clear in her stare. "Good night, Zoe," she said slowly, voice dripping with implication. "I'll see you tomorrow." After Rachel left, silence engulfed us again, thicker and more complex than before. Dr. Clark stepped toward his desk, picking up the cup, studying it closely before turning back to me, eyes conflicted yet intense. "Someone's playing games," he murmured, voice dark with a hint of anger beneath his carefully maintained calm. "I think someone suspects us." "Suspects us of what?" I whispered, heart racing, unsure if I feared discovery or desperately longed for confirmation. He closed the distance between us, his gaze never wavering from mine. "You already know." The intensity in his eyes made my breath catch again. We stood, frozen, inches apart, tension igniting anew. The air between us felt charged with possibilities and threats, intimate, forbidden, exhilarating. My mind flashed back to Rachel's knowing look, the lipstick stain, the unsettling suspicion that someone was deliberately pushing us toward exposure, or worse. Aiden reached out gently, tracing his fingers along my jawline. I leaned instinctively toward his touch, heart hammering painfully. Just as his thumb brushed my bottom lip, sending sparks cascading through me, the unmistakable chime of an incoming text shattered our fragile bubble. He withdrew immediately, grabbing his phone, his expression turning grim as he read the message. He looked up at me slowly, eyes suddenly serious, almost grave. "We need to talk, away from here. Can you trust me?" I swallowed hard, knowing the stakes had just skyrocketed. Meeting his gaze firmly, I nodded, feeling both terrified and strangely alive. "Then meet me tomorrow evening. Alone." He leaned close, whispering in a voice thick with tension. "Because if we don't act soon, we'll lose control of everything." As he pulled away, leaving me breathless, I realized I'd willingly stepped into something I couldn't turn back from. Even though every instinct warned me of danger ahead. If you're hooked, you might want to stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button for me. All day, anticipation gnawed at my nerves, my thoughts spiraling uncontrollably around what Aiden had said. "We need to talk, away from here." I replayed his words relentlessly as the hours dragged by, barely able to focus on my work. Rachel's knowing smile haunted me, as did the mysterious lipstick stain on Aiden's coffee cup. Who else could be involved in this twisted scenario? And what did they know? When evening finally came, I walked through the nearly deserted parking garage beneath the research facility, my pulse quickening with every echoing footstep. My car felt impossibly far, away, the oppressive silence amplifying every doubt and fear that raced through my mind. Was I really ready for whatever awaited me tonight? Just as I reached my car door, my phone vibrated, the screen illuminating with a message from an unknown number. "Don't trust him, Zoe. He's lying to you. Meet me at Cafe Solis instead. I'll explain everything." A chill ran through my spine. Someone knew exactly where I was going and who I was meeting. The unknown sender's cryptic warning spun my thoughts into chaos. Could I really trust Aiden? But could I risk betraying him by meeting someone else, Someone anonymous? Possibly dangerous? Ignoring the pounding in my chest, I drove straight to the quiet, dimly lit bar where Aiden had told me to meet him. He was already waiting, seated in a secluded booth, the shadows accentuating the worry etched on his face. As I approached, his eyes softened, momentary relief washing over his features before returning to seriousness. "You made it," he said softly, gesturing for me to sit beside him. The intimacy of our proximity felt instantly charged. "Thank you for trusting me." I hesitated, torn between truth and caution. Finally, I pulled out my phone and showed him the mysterious text. "Someone else knows about us," I admitted. "They said you're lying." Aiden's jaw tightened, but he didn't look surprised. He sighed heavily, running a tense hand through his hair. "I feared as much," he admitted. "Rachel wasn't there by accident last night. She suspects something between us, but she's not the one who sent that message." My stomach twisted sharply. "Then who?" His expression darkened, his voice dropping even lower. "I have my suspicions. Someone who wants to sabotage both our careers. Someone I was once close to." I thought of the lipstick-stained coffee cup, jealousy prickling again. "A former lover?" I asked, unable to hide the bitterness in my voice. He nodded slowly, regret clear in his eyes. "Her name is Clara Bennett. She left the research team shortly before you joined. We were involved. Briefly. It ended badly." The confession stung, but it also felt like a relief to hear honesty from him. Still, jealousy simmered quietly beneath my controlled facade. "Why would she threaten us now?" "Because she wants revenge," he said firmly. "I ended things when I realized she was stealing data from my research. She vowed to destroy my career, and now she's trying to use you to do it." Aiden leaned closer, his hand finding mine beneath the table, fingers gently entwining in a gesture both protective and possessive. My pulse raced. "You and I haven't crossed any professional lines yet," he murmured, his eyes searching mine deeply. "But our attraction is obvious. Clara sees it. Rachel suspects it. We have to be careful, more careful than ever." "What do we do?" I asked quietly, my voice trembling slightly as emotions battled within me. Fear, desire, confusion. It was all becoming too much to handle. Aiden squeezed my hand reassuringly, his voice strong, yet gentle. "We expose Clara before she exposes us. Find proof she's behind this. If we don't, she'll ruin everything. Our work, your reputation, mine." A weight settled in my chest as his words sank in. I knew he was right. The stakes had never been higher. But the idea of confronting Clara, someone capable of sending cryptic threats and stalking our movements, terrified me. Aiden must have seen my hesitation because he took my hand gently under the table, his fingers entwining firmly with mine. The warmth of his touch felt reassuring, electrifying. "We can do this together, Zoe," he whispered, his voice filled with determination and a longing I couldn't ignore. "But we have to act quickly." My heart raced, blood pounding loudly in my ears. Yet, despite the looming danger, I couldn't deny the thrill of being in this forbidden alliance with him. I squeezed his hand, nodding slowly. "I'm with you." He smiled softly, genuine relief flickering in his gaze before quickly turning serious again. "Tomorrow, we confront her. Together." Just as I was about to reply, his eyes widened slightly, darting behind me. Instinctively, I turned my head and saw her. Clara stood in the entrance of the cafe, her sharp gaze piercing directly into mine, lips curled in a triumphant, dangerous smile. My breath caught painfully in my throat as she raised her phone, clearly recording us together. "Smile, Zoe," Clara called out, her voice mocking, icy. "You're about to go viral." My heart sank, panic rising fast as I glanced at Aiden, whose jaw had tightened fiercely. The betrayal was clear now. Someone had led her straight to us. Rachel? Another hidden enemy? Clara slipped outside quickly, and before I could think clearly, I stood up, instinctively moving to chase after her. Aiden grabbed my arm, stopping me. "No," he whispered sharply, pulling me back down. "She wants you to react. We'll only give her more evidence." I sank helplessly back into the booth, heart pounding furiously, feeling trapped. Clara had everything she needed to destroy us, or at least our reputations. The line we'd carefully towed for weeks had just been brutally crossed, and there was no turning back now. Aiden cupped my cheek gently, forcing me to look into his eyes. His voice was firm, resolute. "We'll handle this. Trust me." But as Clara disappeared into the shadows outside the cafe, a chilling thought echoed relentlessly in my mind. How could I trust him, or anyone, when betrayal seemed to lurk in every corner of our world? The next morning, dread knotted painfully in my stomach as I approached the lab. The video Clara had taken hadn't surfaced yet, but it hung over my head like a ticking time bomb. Every glance from my colleagues felt accusatory. Every whispered conversation felt conspiratorial. Aiden texted early, telling me to meet him discreetly in his office, but even that felt dangerous now. When I entered his office, closing the door behind me, Aiden was pacing anxiously. His tie hung loosely around his neck, his normally calm demeanor shaken. As soon as he saw me, he closed the distance quickly, his expression grave. "She hasn't sent the video out yet," he said, his voice low, urgent. "Clara's waiting for something. Maybe a chance to blackmail us or just torment us. Either way, we need to act fast." My voice trembled slightly. "How? She's already won. She has all the leverage." "No," he said firmly, cupping my face gently. His thumb traced my cheek soothingly, sending warmth rushing through me despite the tension. "We're not giving her that power." "What choice do we have?" I whispered. "She could ruin us both. Everything we've worked for, gone, just like that." Aiden's eyes darkened fiercely. "Not if we beat her to it. We'll go straight to the director and disclose everything. The late nights, the project deadlines. We'll show we haven't broken any real rules. We'll frame it as harassment and threats from Clara. It's risky, Zoe, but if we control the narrative, we have a fighting chance." Fear surged sharply within me. "But if we fail," his hand brushed softly against my shoulder, sending a familiar rush through my veins. "I won't let that happen. You trusted me this far. Please trust me again." I hesitated, my thoughts racing. Coming clean was terrifying, yet the thought of Clara dictating our fate felt unbearable. Gathering my courage, I met his gaze firmly. "All right, let's face this together." Relief softened his features as he squeezed my hand reassuringly. We moved quickly, knowing our window was narrow. Within minutes, we were outside Director Marcus Hammond's office, hearts racing, prepared to lay bare everything. The director listened, carefully, his face unreadable, as we recounted the late-night incident, Clara's threats, and her invasive recording. He leaned back thoughtfully, steepling his fingers before finally speaking. "Do you have evidence of Clara's threats?" My heart sank slightly. We didn't. But as panic began rising again, Rachel unexpectedly entered the room, her expression deeply troubled. She placed her phone quietly on the director's desk. "They don't, but I do." Stunned silence filled the room. Rachel glanced apologetically toward me, guilt flashing briefly across her face. "Clara asked me to spy on Zoe and Dr. Clark," She tried to convince me you were having an affair, breaking company policy. When I refused to participate, she threatened me too. My eyes widened in shock. Rachel wasn't betraying us. She'd been trying to warn us all along. The pieces suddenly clicked, the lipstick-stained coffee cup, the secretive glances. Rachel had been investigating Clara's motives in secret. The director listened closely as Rachel played recordings, Clara's voice dripping with venomous threats, demands for sabotage, and explicit details of her intent to ruin both Aiden and me. When it finished, silence lingered heavily before the director finally nodded solemnly. "I'll handle Clara personally," he assured us gravely. "But let me be clear. While your actions haven't crossed official boundaries, the optics are delicate. I'd advise extreme caution moving forward." We nodded silently, relief mingling with unease. The immediate crisis was over, but the damage had already been done, at least emotionally. Aiden and I exchanged an uncertain glance, the intensity still burning in his eyes. Later that night, standing alone in the softly lit parking garage again, I struggled to process everything that had happened. Footsteps approached slowly, deliberately, and I turned sharply, heart hammering until I saw Aiden emerge from the shadows. He approached cautiously, eyes cautious yet hopeful. "We did it," he said softly, stopping a careful distance away. "Clara won't bother us again, thanks to Rachel," I whispered back. "I was wrong about her." "We both were," he admitted, stepping closer. "Trust is hard, Zoe, especially when the stakes are this high." I looked up at him, feeling a strange sense of calm, despite everything. "And now? Where do we go from here?" He hesitated briefly, vulnerability flickering across his face before reaching out to gently cup my cheek. "Maybe we slow down. Maybe we step back, think things through clearly. Or maybe..." His voice trailed off, uncertainty clouding his gaze. "Or maybe we stop hiding." I breathed softly, finally admitting aloud the desire we'd both struggled to suppress. He smiled faintly, his eyes searching mine. "Are you sure?" I nodded slowly, heart racing. "If we learned anything, it's that secrets can destroy us. I don't want to hide anymore." Without another word, he gently leaned forward, his lips brushing softly against mine. A kiss tender yet filled with suppressed longing, relief, and hope. It felt like a declaration, a promise that whatever came next, we'd face it openly. As we pulled apart, Aiden cupped my cheek softly, his voice steady and reassuring. "Then we'll face it together, openly." Days later, Clara quietly resigned, the video never surfacing, the whispers eventually fading into harmless office gossip. Rachel became our ally, offering quiet support. And as Aiden and I navigated our new reality, side by side openly in the lab, I realized something profound. Some risks, though terrifying, are worth taking. Yet even now, as I lock the lab doors, behind me each night, one lingering thought remains, an echo that refuses to fade entirely. Was Clara truly acting alone? Or had someone else secretly pulled her strings? Thank you for listening to my confession. If you want more untold stories like this, you know what to do. Tell me, what would you have done in my position? Would you risk it all for a secret romance?